I want to take this a little different direction. We've talked a little bit about law enforcement, but on June 14th, the heads of state with NATO, the NATO allied countries met, and they issued a communique from Brussels and addressed the issue of increasingly complex security environment that all these nations are dealing with. And they made this statement. They issued 79 statements, number 32, and I'll summarize it, that the alliance is determined to employ the full range of capabilities at all times to actively deter, defend against, and counter the full spectrum of cyber threats, including those conducted as part of hybrid campaigns and in accordance with international law. But they reaffirm a decision as to when a cyber attack would lead to the invocation of Article 5, which would be taken by NATO allied nations on a case-by-case basis. And they say they recognize that the impact of significant malicious cumulative cyber activities might, in certain circumstances, be considered as amounting to an armed attack. That's pretty serious, and I think that's one of the things that we've kind of danced around. We really haven't addressed. We treat all of these the ransomware attacks as criminal activity when they may not be exactly carried out by nation states, but in some cases, and I think in particular Russia and China, they're at least, if not sanctioned, approved. And Mr. Lee, I want to direct this to you because you have a military background. We have tremendous capabilities in our military to address this. Does it make sense for us to counterattack, and particularly in some of the nations where the government's really a group of oligarchs with tremendous financial interest? Could you address that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think most people in the military would generally like to not get to military force. We want to take all mechanisms available before we get there, and I think there are still plenty left. However, to directly address the question, I think that we do have to draw certain red lines of what we will and will not accept in this country and how we're going to respond. And when I've looked at the messaging of NATO and others before on that topic, one of the challenges not only is that we don't specify what that red line is, but we don't tell anybody what we're going to do about it. And so it's not deterrence, it's strategic ambiguity. So if we are going to use military response, we better well define it.
Yeah, I'm not talking about an armed response. I'm talking about in the cyber field, because they're attacking infrastructure. And I think our government may have a different definition of what is critical infrastructure than perhaps your organization does. And that's troubling to me. I don't think that we can allow these cumulative attacks to continue when we know that these groups are giving safe harbor in these nations. There needs to be a price that has to be paid. I want to transition a little bit away from that, and Ms. Walden, I do appreciate what Microsoft's doing. You've really stepped up in terms of law enforcement, but I'm just not sure that it's enough. And we've had this discussion about whether or not people should pay. And it was mentioned the percentage increase in ransomware attacks. And I just wonder if the fact that people have cyber insurance, and we know that some of these ransomware, these hackers have hacked into these insurance companies and they know what certain groups are capable of paying, is the insurance helping or hurting? I mean, when they know that they have the ability to pay and they negotiate outside of law enforcement, is that helping or hurting?
Quite frankly, I don't know if it's helping or hurting. I'm not a cyber insurance expert. But I will say that there is a whole ecosystem out there that supports victims that are attacked by ransom. And cyber insurance companies are just part of that ecosystem. But whether they're helping or hurting, it's the victims that need to make the right business and operational decisions. I would hope that it means to not pay, but I can understand when they do pay.
Well, one of the things that's missing on the task force website, and that is whether or not people should pay and the whole issue of the insurance. That seems to be a pretty substantial omission. Could you address that, Mr. Rayner?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Palmer. I think it really, at the end of the day, was the only item that the task force didn't come to a very specific recommendation on. In terms of why, I think there was a general leaning toward I think as my colleagues here have noted, is making it so that the least amount of money is going to these criminals as possible, and to devise a set of steps so that we could actually move in that direction. If we were to, for instance, want to prohibit payment now, the ecosystem is simply not ready. It is not prepared for that sort of injunction. So how can we get there? The report actually does lay out a number of steps, milestones, potentially that could be taken on over the course of a couple of years to get us there. That's shoring up the defenses that we're working with. That's going after these criminals so that they don't act with such impunity. There's a good list of steps that need to be taken first, and then maybe we can move in that direction.
I thank the chair, and I'll submit
thank the
the balance